Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Paws for Maw Tail Podcast. I'm your host, Shepherd the Leopard, or Shep the Snep for short. Paws for Maw Tail Podcast is a podcast featuring members that are close or in the furry fandom. And today we have a wonderful guest, the fabulous MtKanjon.
Hi. How's it going?
Going good. So just a few things for housekeeping. We've been really excited by how much people loved the Too Chaotic episode. If you want to be on this podcast, we are looking for people. So please fill out the form down below if you're interested in applying to be on the podcast. We'd love to have you on, especially if you think your story is, well, even if your stories, most people's stories actually are pretty cool. But yeah, go ahead and fill that out. We'd love to have you on the podcast. And then also, if you're watching this and you haven't hit like and or subscribed to the podcast, that helps us out a ton, especially as we're just getting started with this. So with that, yeah, punch it. So with that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and get started. Kanjon, why don't you just give us like a little brief introduction about yourself and who you are and what kind of brought you into the furry fandom? What are some of the things you like about it?
Oh gosh, yeah. Okay, so yeah, my name is MtKanjon, like literally mountain canyon, but usually just go by Kanjon. I am in my 30s. I have been in the fandom like only really a couple years. Basically, sort of got into it basically right before 30. Have kind of watched from the sidelines for quite a while. I grew up sort of as like a computer geek kind of person, like work in tech, and have sort of shifted towards going towards the art side of things because I think that's just really cool and really nice. There's just so much between like the technology side and the transition of things where you can find like similarities and differences in how that has like shifted things in my life and all that. But well, that's what we're gonna get into.
Yeah. Before we go too far, based on like yourself and kind of your own aptitudes for different discussions, what would you rate this episode or these series of episodes, however long we go, like rated G for general audience or PG-13? How would you, what do you think we should rate this, just as a disclaimer for those that are watching?
It's going to be PG-13 extended because I'm going to say fuck, but not in the first 7 seconds.
Whoa. What if I edit this?
Don't like that.
What if I edit this to where it's the first 7 seconds now? I'll just put that in the beginning.
But I won't really get into like, I don't know, very adult topics, I think. That's just not necessarily me for this, at least. But yeah, I don't know. I swear habitually. So,
so just a language advisory then.
Yeah.
So I think some of the things that we're going to be talking about is just your experience learning about the furry fandom. We'll talk about how you grew up and what kind of brought you to this point in your life. But some of the other things that we might talk about is just your experience learning how to art kind of later on from when most people probably started doing art. And then interested in like maybe some of your career growth, because you've had a fairly successful career that would be really interesting for some people to kind of hear. How did you get there? What steps did you take to get a career in especially in the tech industry? And then we'll talk about maybe some other things like ADHD, and we'll just go from there and some of your experiences like that. So
yeah.
With that, why don't we just get started? Kanjon, where were you born? Tell us about your early childhood. What was your family like?
I was born in Ohio. Oh no. Born and grew up in Ohio. The state is exactly what you think it is. It's just, it's okay.
So okay, because that's a meme nowadays. Ohio is a meme. Why, from your own childhood experience, why?
It's just, I don't know. People that live in Ohio and haven't yet escaped Ohio, because everyone from Ohio is either like they've either left or they're going to escape. That's a joke. But it's sort of like when you're in Ohio, when you grow up in it, you kind of learn of this being sort of the normal, and it's sort of like the average America and all that. Like a lot of companies love to use it for polling and test markets because it's just sort of like the average pool of like Americans. And so everything in Ohio just sort of feels like this general shard of normal. And you go visit anywhere else, like cities on the coast or like beaches, or you go to Colorado and you go to the mountains or anything, and you just find all these things that are just so different. And they're different and they're all like cool ways and whatnot. But Ohio itself is just sort of this spot that is typical Midwestern type area. It has some cool places, it has some kind of lame places. But when you grow up there, it's just sort of like, it's here. This is the generic definition of life and growing up. And yeah, it of course varies person to person. And like I had a good time growing up. Like I'm
Mhm.
not gonna get too mean about Ohio, but it's one of those places where I was like, oh yeah, Ohio, woo! And then I left Ohio and I was like, oh wow, it's way better where I am now. Um, but yeah, I'm in Seattle now. I don't think I mentioned
Mhm.
that, but we'll get to that bit, I feel later on.
Did you feel like that description of Ohio? Did you have the average Ohio
Yeah.
life?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a pretty rural area. Like my school was pretty rural, and our class size was fairly small. We were kind of on the outskirts of a city, sort of in central Ohio, and it was a school that was like fun enough. Like we had a lot of outdoor activities, and like the teachers were nice, and I feel like I in general had a decent time growing up through like primary school, middle school, high school. Um, But at the same time, it's like I look back on it, I'm like, it it was just school. That's all it was. I don't really pine for like the days of high school like some folks have, but I made some friends. I had some ups and downs through that too, but it was there. Um, Sort of growing up early on, like just sort of being in a rural area, I kind of learned to sort of, I don't know, do things on my own a lot because first when you're living in the city, like you go visit the neighbors a bunch, and in a rural area, you have a few neighbors, and we did have some, and we'd go visit uh, fairly often. Like I remember, like when I was really young, my parents would like drop me off over there when they would go out of town or something, just for not daycare, but for someone else to watch me, and my sisters as well. I have an older sister, and we're close to the same age, and a younger sister who a little bit younger. Um, but yeah, like I just remember like going over to friends' houses and we'd play video games like really late at night or early in the morning, um, that sort of thing. So a lot of some typical experience of like Midwestern culture there, but
Mhm.
a little bit of independence. I think I sort of took an interest in like trying to figure out how things worked early on and all that, which sort of led to like learning a lot about video games, engineering, like mechanical type stuff as well. So
Oh, cool. So in Ohio, it sounds like fairly rural, and you strike me as somebody that's very outgoing, extroverted to some extent, or not. Is that more like a learned trait? Because in
no,
Ohio, you probably didn't have a lot of people around as compared to like maybe other places.
uh,
So how was that
oh,
dynamic growing up?
I'm actually like very introverted. Like still am. Like I don't know if that's a thing that necessarily changes over a person's life, but like definitely was very introverted growing up, and like I was pretty shy in school for various reasons we can get into, but like I had friends and we would hang out, and they were also kind of introverted friends, right? Like so we would find the same interests like video games or anything like that. And hang out, but we all had our
Mhm.
own spaces too.
So were you one of those kids that you had to go to your friend's house to play video games, or did your parents like allow you to have video games growing up,
I
or
was
because
allowed to have video games. I had a Game Boy Pocket, what like the original like clear one that they came out with that, or I think the red one was the original, but one of those. Um, and I remember getting what was it, like Kirby's Block Ball, which is sort of like Breakout, but it's Kirby. I still like I can feel the motions in that game if I play that now, despite having not played it for decades. It ingrained so deeply into my head. Um, that and Pokemon, and like my neighbor also had a Game Boy, and like we would get a link cable and trade Pokemon and play multiplayer and all
Yes.
that. But both that neighbor as well as another neighbor had home consoles too, and I'd go over there to like we play Mario Kart, Mario 64, Super Mario World, a lot of the Mario games. I was definitely a Nintendo kid. One of my cousins had a Sega Genesis and played Sonic a good bit too, so I kind of got into that a bit. But at least around the home, it was just sort of going back and forth there with those sorts of games and whatnot. And my parents were like, it wasn't that they didn't want me to play video games; they were fine with it, but they were like, well, your video game thing is the Game Boy. You don't need a game console. And I was like, okay. I didn't care. I wasn't even that jealous. I was like, yep, Game Boy. Whee! So that was just sort of my sort of video game experience growing up. And like, as I started to get more into computers, I actually did do emulation. But I didn't really get a home console until like midway through like the GameCube when I got a used one at like GameStop or something. Got really into like Smash Bros at the time, and then got a Wii, and then
Mhm.
there.
So it sounds like you were very an active learner. You said you loved to tinker with things. You loved to like
Yeah.
pull things apart. Were you like the smart kid at school?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my! You reminded me of something that my parents tell me I used to do as a toddler. Like, we would go to stores or shops or something, and like sometimes the things in the shops were things of interest, but sometimes just like random things about the shop were things that I would fixate on. Like, they tell me that one time they took me out of a store like crying because I couldn't figure out how like the drawers on a random shelf worked.
No.
And I'm like, I don't remember that, but that I believe it. That sounds true. So like stuff like that, like just wanting to know, like if I see something and go, what, how does it work? I gotta figure it out. And like I'm still kind of like that today. I can suppress that a lot because I have so much stuff I want to care about and not enough time to do literally everything.
Mhm.
But that's really contributed to like a lot of what I do, like from my job to learning how to draw and all that stuff.
Mhm. Was some of those things like borderline obsessive growing up and into your adulthood? Would you describe yourself as maybe having those kinds of like when you get into something you just really have to like see it through to the end and you just have to know everything about it? Or are you said like now you're getting better at pulling away at things. Has that been a theme for you kind of
Yeah,
growing up and other places where you
I don't
just have to really get into something?
like I think I definitely would like really focus on things when I did them, but I never feel like I had too much trouble like breaking off of something to go do something else, like and then come back to it. Like I was okay, like because we had dial-up growing up. You could only be on the internet when people didn't want to make a phone call, and even then, like limited amount of time because what if someone calls? We don't know. Um, yeah, the things that go beep 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 beep, beep and
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah,
for
yeah,
for
all
the
that.
younger viewers that don't know what dial-up is, you had to
Yeah.
get on the phone and you had to dial in, and only one person in your household could make a call. Um,
And we even being in a rural area, our dial-up connection wasn't great. It was like half the speed of what it should have been, which was already not great. Like 56K modem, and it was running like 30 something, which is like literally about like 2 to 3 kilobytes per second. So downloading things was just whew. I remember one time downloading the Adobe Flash trial because I wanted to try like animation and stuff, and we had like a class in school where we were doing that for whatever reason.
oh wow.
Um, or it wasn't in school; it was in like some summer camp thing or something. I think there was a couple times I remember doing it, but I just can't remember what it was. Something that was like run by the library, I want to say. Um, and so like yeah, I wanted to like get a copy of that for myself and like try it out, and I did, but it was like several nights of just leaving the download going because it took a while to download that like what 50 megabytes or whatever. It's just oof. Um yeah. So yeah, like while I had time to use the internet, I would like get really deep into things because I want to figure out how things work, and that sort of led to me wanting to learn how to code and whatnot. I'm like, oh, website, how does it do the thing when you click the button?
Mhm.
Um, so I learned about that. Got some books pretty dang early on. Honestly, like fifth grade, I want to say, is when my parents were like, "Okay, here you can have this JavaScript book." That's like,
Wow.
yeah, a book on HTML too. It was by Elizabeth something. I forget. It was like a
Oh, you even remember the name somewhat? Like,
yeah. I read the shit out of those books. Like basically technical manuals, but I was like, yes,
Mhm.
favorite books.
So
Yeah,
that's super interesting to me because you had parents at a time when computers weren't quite as in demand,
yeah,
weren't quite as popular, but you had an interest and your parents actually pushed you towards that interest. Like,
yeah,
do you want
yeah.
to talk about like your parents sound really good?
Yeah, oh yeah, they're great. I love them. Like they definitely like encourage me to learn things.
Hmm.
And they bought that computer like several years before I really started to like learn anything about them, but they wanted it to sort of be like an educational. And also, I think at one point they were doing something with like I don't know. They had a need to like write and type letters and all that stuff, right? So
Hmm.
that sort of thing. Yeah, we had that computer a very long time, and then it was like such a huge leap when we got a new computer. Like I want to say like 10 years later or something. There was like, oh my gosh, this thing can do things.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, my parents definitely encouraged that. They definitely had to like slow it down sometimes because it's like, oh, it's time to get dinner. I'm like, oh, but I'm doing stuff. But you can always like pause that sort of thing. And
Hmm. But that's interesting to me that so they gave you, a young fifth grader, a technical manual on how to code in JavaScript and HTML. Like
you
that's not been my experience growing.
I had a whole collection of those books at one point. There were some that we would find at the library, and then some that we ended up buying because they were like I don't know, like $20 or $30. It wasn't too much, and I got so much out of it. And some of the books that we got, like I remember getting one on C++ because I'm like, oh, everyone talks about that thing. I want to learn that, and I didn't end up really learning C++ till like a decade later because that one's just fucking hard.
Hmm.
But like JavaScript, you go in your browser, you have a little page, you type alert parentheses quotes a thing and you run it and it pops up a box. It's like, oh, that's neat. I made it do a thing. You do just like little bits at a time. And it just kind of kept growing with that. It was like, do a little bit, do a little bit more, a little bit more. And like, I didn't ever really get to a point where I was writing like really good code for like a very long time. Like, gosh, if I started in like fifth grade, I want to say it wasn't really until honestly like college that my code was starting to actually look like something that could be passable. I was, of course, learning so many things about it, but uh, big span of time where it was just like I was just fine, just making things and making the thing work. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit garbage, but it's the thing that I figured out.
Hmm.
Um, and I just kind of went that way until going to college and kind of doing a more formal training of that.
Oh, cool. So I take it though, with all of these book smarts and the ability to and interest to get into coding, you're also like you were also the high school football team captain, um, and were immaculate at sports. You probably were like the biggest
Oh my
sports ball
god.
player ever.
Whew, my parents wanted me to do sports. I think just to keep me exercising and all that, but like they didn't have any grand aspirations of me being a star athlete. So like I did like a lot of cross country growing up, which honest to God, like was not really a huge fan of it, but like I don't know, it was something. A little bit of swimming, didn't really do too much with that, and then like honestly beyond that, but not a bunch. I remember doing soccer like when I was like 4 or 5 or something, but like oh, that's the only thing I liked about that was like afterwards we would get ice cream, and so it was just like doing whatever the heck they told me to do for the hour or whatever that they have little kids running around a field, and then ice cream. Yay. Um, but yeah, like again, small school. Even growing up, like the high school and middle school were like the school district, but elementary school, the like first like 5 years plus kindergarten before that was three separate branches of it. It's like regional
Hmm.
areas, so they were even smaller. So like your average class size, like for I think that well we had like two sets for each, whatever, was like 20 people.
Oh wow.
And that teacher would like teach all the subjects throughout the day, and then yeah, the next you had that one teacher for the whole year. And then middle school, well, you would switch for each
Hmm.
of the subjects. They kind of, get you into that sort of flow. In high school, more typical with that. But yeah, it was small, so like you had a lot more like people that you knew pretty closely because like of course you're going to make friends with classmates and whatnot.
Hmm. So even though you kind of didn't participate in maybe some of the more like socially popular topics in school, you still felt like you had a really good friend group,
Oh yeah.
a good social
Yeah,
environment growing
like
up.
there's always like that trope of like, oh yeah, you be the nerd, you're the kid that gets beat up and all that. But like we had enough nerds, and honestly, people were just kind of like nice. Like there were situations involving bullies at one point in school, but like it wasn't that bad, honestly, in hindsight. Like, everything's terrible when you're a kid, but like it was like, oh, it was a little bit. And like honestly, one of the bullies I had in middle school was like someone that ended up being a really good friend in high school. I mean,
Oh,
he knew
cool.
that like that was kind of shitty afterwards, and it's like, oh yeah, yeah, we meet up with that sort of thing. But yeah, like just elementary school all the way through high school was like there's sort of the groups of people, but everyone's very friendly to each other, and it was nice. Which like I know not a lot of folks sort of have that experience. So, like it seemed really lucky that it was like that.
Yeah, I think there's a good amount of people that have that experience.
Yeah.
Most of the time, school is for most people is pretty good. But I mean, we had Chaotic on before this, and his experience was very different. Same kind of intellectual trajectory, mindset growing up, but he did experience some of the bullying, and it sounds like for you, like it sometimes it's just where we grow up that we have all that, the difference because of that. But sounds like a really good childhood, really. As you were growing up, you talked about playing games like Pokemon or Mario Nintendo games. Were there any other like TV shows that you
Gosh.
remember or other kinds of media as a kid that were just like, yes, this was
Oh,
the thing?
this is my fun story that I've sort of figured out. Um, I want to say less than a year ago, and I have realized what my oldest memory is, and I figured this out by I was talking with someone about Lion King for some reason, and I'm like, yeah, I saw that in theaters, and then I was like thinking, that's an old movie. Like, when did I see that? When was that in theaters? And I'm like, it was then. I was 2 years old. Do
Oh,
you remember
wow.
things when you're 2 years old? And I looked that up on like Wikipedia and whatnot. It's like, yeah, your earliest memories basically start to form at age 2. Earliest permanent memories, really. Um, and like before that, like you might sort of have like a cloud of things, but I honestly cannot think of anything before seeing the Lion King theaters. And like I remember where we sat. I remember looking at the ceiling and seeing these weird like circle shadows up there that were probably like speakers or sound dampeners or something. I don't know. And I remember seeing the movie, and I remember Hakuna Matata and all that. And I remember months afterwards, we get the VHS little plastic tape version of DVDs or Blu-rays or digital downloads, but you can hold them. And I watched the shit out of that because that's what kids do. You watch one movie over and over. And then over time, like a friend as a toddler, like who my parents would drop me off at their house when they went out of town sometimes, came over and he wanted to watch Arthur. I was like, oh, I want to watch Lion King. But we watched Arthur, and it's like a new thing. I think it was actually new at the time. Oh gosh. Um, and I was like, oh shit, Arthur. And then I really liked Arthur. So like, yeah, or maybe a sign of something there. My first memory being Lion King, a pretty
Yeah.
objectively furry piece of media.
I was going to say, like, a lot of people probably their first memories are of their parents
Oh man, that
or
was Lion
something else
King.
like that. Your first memory was of Mufasa.
Yeah. And playing Pokemon. Yeah, yeah, that's good stuff.
Oh, awesome. Before college, you were learning to code. Did you do any fun, like actual, can you remember any projects that you worked on, computer related, video game even related before college that kind of got you set up and prepared for college as
Oh
you were
yeah.
growing up?
Yeah, so like on the video game side of things, like I kind of started out like when I first got those like books on JavaScript, I was like, I made a little program basically. It was like a little tiny little web page that you could just save. And it was basically like a states and capitals flashcard type thing where it would give you a random state and then it would tell you what the capital is when you clicked OK, and then it would just keep doing it. Um, And like, looking back on that, that's like a very easy piece of code. But like for me then it's like, oh yeah, I did this thing. And I actually put those on floppy disks and sold them at school. And at first the school was like, you can't sell things. But then they were like looked at it again, they're like, okay, that's fine actually. And a bunch of people bought my $1 States and Capitals little game thing. And that kind of extended on later where I'm just like, yeah, I want to make more games. And so I want to say like around 2003, 2004, I found something called Game Maker. I don't remember how I found it, but it popped up somewhere. And I think it was Game Maker 4 at the time. It might have just been switching to 5. And it was just this thing where you open it up, you have a screen of, well, sprites, and you can plop the sprites down. You can download new sprites or use some of these built-in ones and hit play. And it's like you have a little platformer. And then there was one kind of templates for RPGs and all that stuff. And you open these up more, and each of these little objects has sort of like logic to it that I was doing with like the States and Capitals thing. It's like, oh, it's just this block does this block, does this block. And you could build lots of stuff with that. So I just started to make things. And I never really made a game that was like a cohesive game experience. But I remember specifically making a game that had like a ball on it, because there was like this Palm Pilot game. I did have a Palm Pilot. I forgot about that. Huh.
So explain, because there's going to be people that don't know what a Palm Pilot is.
Imagine a smartphone, but it's black and white, and it's also kind of dumb. And I don't even think it connects to the internet, at least not the one that I had. But you can like write on it, and you can make type letters and all that stuff. And you can plug it into your computer and install apps that way. That's how you installed apps. You had to plug that thing in and drag and drop files onto it. And so I had that, and I remember this game on there that just had basically this concept of like, it was sort of like a puzzle game where you have a ball and you're moving it around, and it has sort of like physics to it. And you hit some buttons that like unlock doors and like might close other doors. Some that would like reset things or that sort of thing. Like almost like the game Chips Challenge. Have you heard of that one?
No.
Oh gosh. So Chips Challenge, how do I explain this? It's basically like, you can kind of think of it like a puzzle RPG, but the levels are very short. And it was in like Windows's Best of Entertainment pack or something, also on floppy disks, that we had growing up. And you just have this guy, and you move him around, and he just goes tile by tile, and you find keys to unlock doors. And in some spots, there's monsters that chase you. Some of them, the monsters only move when you do. Some of them, they're always moving. And your goal is just to get to the end, to unlock the door, get enough chips, open the door, get to the end. And when I say chips, I actually mean like computer chips, because I don't know, it was like computer themed. I don't remember what the story of that game was, but I think it was only ever described in the manual. So it was sort of like making a game like that, just sort of a puzzle game where it's 2D and you move things around. And over time, I even made it 3D, because I think Game Maker 6 had come out, and they were like, you can do 3D now, woo! And it was still the same kind of easy 3D building type thing, where you have a 2D map and you just tell it, make this 3D. And it wasn't like a magical 3D thing. You had to tell it what each object looked like in 3D and how that worked. But it worked. And I always found that sort of stuff super cool. Like when you get it to work, it's just like, wow, this is a thing that I made, and it moves and you can do things. And then like I would always get to the point where it's like, okay, I made the part of the game that makes the game work. Now it's time to build the levels. And I'd always like build like 3 of them and then get totally distracted by something else. And then that was that. I'd go build something else. So I never like completed anything with that. Mm-hmm. Hindsight, big sign of ADHD there, but whatever.
So the parts that interested you the most were just the building aspects of it, not so much the design, but you really loved like putting all the pieces together to have it be functional.
Which kind of led to me thinking growing up that I wasn't like a creative person, because I just like wanted to make the thing and figure out how it works and move on. Mm-hmm. But like in hindsight, like that's also like a sign of creativity, just in like a different way.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay.
Oh, cool. Fun. So you had all of this experience, I mean, prior to high school, which is exceptional. Like I think most people growing up, especially in your age group, like did not have access to a majority of those kinds of tech-related things. So you kind of started your college career already primed and ready. Did you know as you were going to college, like this is it, this is what I want to pursue?
Oh yeah, no question. It was
like explain that process, like getting into college and focusing in on that topic.
Yeah. Like I there was no question of like what kind of major degree I wanted to get. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do computers, whether that's called computer science or computer engineering or whatever. Like it varied place to place, but
Hmm.
I was like, yes, that's what it's gonna be. And even like in high school, I was kind of doing more with some of the folks that I had sort of met through the communities of making games. Um, we sort of splintered off and sort of went sort of like a web dev route and started to learn to make websites and whatnot. I'm like, oh, this is actually a thing that's like useful. And that's the kind of thing that I can like explore more. And so we made like blogs about like technology and whatnot. One of them actually got like decently popular for some weird reason, but I don't know. I don't like to go back and look at it because my writing was just terrible. But it's
So it's
there.
so
Yeah.
like because back then like the blogs were the thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so you were getting actually as you know not even in college really yet, or maybe you were just starting college, but you were doing an active
Yeah.
tech blog essentially that was getting a lot of attention. Like that's
Yeah.
impressive.
And that was before like social media, like stuff like Twitter didn't exist. Not even like predecessors to Twitter existed. It was just you go to websites and then those websites can go to other websites. And maybe you have comments that can link to other websites. There was like sort of a trackback kind of thing. I forget how that worked. Sort of like a vague social network, but you had to own a website for that to work.
Mhm.
And so we did a lot with that, me and a couple friends. And then like yeah, I was like, okay, I can actually use this when applying to colleges. And I think I actually sort of showed some of that in like application letters to places. And like I applied to some spots that were like, you know, prestigious like universities and all that. Um, I think I got like I want to say I got an acceptance letter at like one of those, but I didn't end up doing it because it was just way too expensive. And then like some of the other ones, like MIT, they're just like, nah. And I'm like, well, that's fine. Okay. And I think in hindsight, I don't think I would have liked MIT. It just would not have matched with me.
Mhm.
But I ended up just going to a public university. I mean, Ohio State. It's like, I think it's actually the biggest university or was at the time
It
in
is
the US by
it's
population.
the Ohio
The
State.
Ohio State University. Yeah. Yeah. That's, gosh, that. Um, and so like yeah, I went to that and I had a blast. I had fun with roommates. I had fun with folks in classes, like just learning things. And like that being you know a gigantic college, like it's hard to really see people that you see on a regular basis. But some people you did because you take the same classes and at least you know within your engineering area and then even within like sort of subject matters, you have people that are doing that track all the way through. And so like I definitely met a bunch of folks there and like definitely some friends there that I made, like that I'm still friends with today.
Oh, cool.
Um, and like a big, honestly, like this is sort of a little bit of privilege here as well that I recognize is like my mother worked at the university. And so I got a bit of a discount on like tuition. And it being a public school, it already was a good bit cheap for being in state. And like it took even more off. And I'm like, wow, this is actually really nice. I didn't need MIT or any of the other ones. Like those would have just put me in ridiculous debt.
Mhm.
And so like that like in hindsight was probably one of the better decisions I've made in life was to just go to the public school one. It's fine. And it was great.
Mhm. Um, Not to put you on the spot or anything, but like I think recognizing privilege is important because you know there's a lot of people that have different experiences growing up. Do you see a lot of that? Just your mom worked for the college, so she probably had a college education herself. It sounds like your dad was also fairly intellectual. Um, and I know like you probably can't. It sounds like you came from middle class, but do you see how like maybe some of that helped your trajectory to put you where you are to get you to allow you to have those resources and those connections to kind of allow you to
Yeah.
thrive? Like has that been a something that you've noticed quite a bit and are grateful for or want to expound a little bit on?
Yeah. Like, I mean, I didn't notice it at the time because it just kind of seemed like the way things were. It's like, oh, everybody does this, right? But like in hindsight, it's like, yes, there absolutely was an element of privilege there. Like my parents didn't spend a lot of money. Like, and they were careful to, you know, not get me into any kind of mindset where it's just like, yeah, we can buy this, buy this, buy this. So there was a lot of no there, which I appreciate. Um, but at the same time, like we were like middle class Ohio, but it meant that like there wasn't really a time where like I was lacking in well food or being able to like go to the library to learn things, or even having trouble like getting to school or anything like that. And I know not everyone can say that. Um, and so it wasn't even it doesn't feel like an advantage in terms of like I had anything extra, but it felt like an advantage because I didn't have a lot of negative factors that a lot of people have depending on where they live.
Yeah.
And so that kind of was like thematic uh through college, I want to say.
Oh, cool. I mean, that's something really awesome that your parents were able to provide for you. I mean,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's also awesome like that you see that. Like a lot of people, you know, they it takes a certain kind of individual, which is really shows a lot about you, that you're able to like critically look at that and see that, you know, that did play a part in allowing you to succeed and
Yeah.
get to where you are.
Yeah, it definitely like once I started to like realize those sorts of things, like it kind of changed how I wanted to like approach my own life and like my career and the things that I like to do and all that. And so like it's definitely been influential in like stuff. I mean, even up to today, really.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back into college a little bit. There's a meme that furries run the internet. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of furries in tech. You were in tech in college. When did you get introduced to the fandom? Did you run into some of that in college, or was it after? Talk about some of your furry experiences. What was the first
Yeah.
introduction you had?
Yeah. So I remember walking back up a busy street near the university after I don't know getting food or something, and there was just a couple people in fursuit walking the other way, and I was like, "What is that? That's neat." And one of my friends was like, "Oh no, that's gross. Don't say that." I was like, "Okay." And then we kept on going, and I was like, I honestly didn't really think much of that at the time, and then like I think a little later on, I was like, huh, why is it gross? Why do people think that's just gross? It's just that seems fun. And like, you kind of look stuff up online and it's like, oh, okay, so it's a sex thing or something. It's like, all right. Me at the time, just kind of assuming that I was straight, spoiler alert, was just like, oh yeah, no, okay, not me. And but at the same time, like, I don't know, I still kind of like animal media and all that stuff because it's just more interesting. Um, and that was kind of the start of it. And I didn't really think much more about the fandom until like after graduating, honestly. Like there wasn't a lot of me thinking about furry stuff at all in college. It just
Hmm.
wasn't my focus. It was still kind of computers. It was hanging out with my friends. Uh, just that. I had a lot of fun in college, but
Hmm.
there wasn't a lot of furry stuff
Yeah.
involved there, I think.
Would you say that Ohio was conducive to the furry environment? Like you ran into a couple of fursuiters in college, but that's largely the extent of your experience with furry up to that point. It was just that one secluded
Yeah.
event. So was Ohio, was that just a typical Ohioan thing where you didn't have experience with things like that or anything that was outside of the
I
Ohio
think
norm?
people. I think it was more me being a little dense. I think
Hmm.
people definitely like absolutely there were furries growing up in Ohio, right? And like doing that in college, there probably was a furry group at college for that. But yeah, me just sort of being focused on my degree and my friends, like it's just like kind of went in one ear and out the other. I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird and fun, but okay, and then we're just I'm doing my thing over here. Um, and it didn't even really come up again until somebody else, like at work after I graduated, was just like, "Oh yeah, like that looks like a furry thing." I'm like, "Oh, that thing, huh?" And then like I don't know, I feel like just slowly over time, just a little more hearing about things on, and then it's like, "Oh, hey, that's kind of me."
Oh, cool. So you go through college, you run into your first furry experience, brushed it off, didn't think too much about it. I assume that you probably graduated with the degree in computer science or computer engineering, as you put it. What happens then? Where do you go after that happens?
Yeah, so graduated my senior year we did have a career fair, and I did a bunch of stuff there and like interviewed at a bunch of places. I even got stuck in like a hurricane interviewing somewhere, which was weird. But
Wait. So go in. That sounds like a fun story. So
yeah,
don't just leave off
so
there.
yeah, I was interviewing at a place in Boston, and like shortly after that, there were interviews on campus for another place to work that I was interested in, and there was a storm coming in, and I only noticed this like a day or two before flying out for these interviews in Boston. And I like asked the recruiters at that company, I'm like, hey, there's a storm. Like, do you think we should postpone or something? And they're like, oh, don't worry about it. If your flight gets canceled, we'll reschedule. I should have just been like, no. I was like, all right. So yeah, it was a hurricane that turns out like was basically still a hurricane when I got up to Boston, which is weird for that region of the US, but there you go. So I get to Boston. My outbound flight is like immediately canceled when I land.
Oh
That was like the
no.
last flight to get in. And I'm like, okay, that's fun. So I like emailed or called their travel booking agency or whatever that they used. And I was like, can you get another flight? Like, yeah, we'll get you figured out. I'm like, okay. And I remember doing the interviews there, like just going through heavy rain and everything to get from place to place because their sort of interview office place was like several buildings. So there was a lot of crazy things, and like a lot of people there didn't show up for work because there's a goddamn hurricane. Okay, and like because of that, like I did the interviews there, and then like I think I was there for a solid week, in the hotel because flights just kept getting canceled. I eventually got one on the way back, and I remember like even calling their travel people, and like the power goes out in the hotel. I'm like, okay, cool. Now that phone's dead. And so I was able to call them back though and like get that all done. And yeah, I eventually got a flight back, but like I had missed interviews for a couple other places that I wanted
Oh
to interview
no.
at. And especially with like our college, they were like, you cannot miss interviews. Like you lose your, career fair privileges if you do that with no shows and all that. I'm like, well, fuck. But I emailed them and I CC'd like our recruiting or our college like career fair coordinator or whatever. Um, and I think they kind of understood that a hurricane's a bit of an extenuating circumstance for that. So they're like, "Oh, no problem." And this place actually is like, "Hey, fly out to Seattle and do the interview." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds cool. I'll do that then." And like they, paid for it and all that. Um, and so I did that, and that's where I ended up like working. Ultimately, was there, and I almost wonder like if I didn't have that sort of experience where like they actually went the extra mile to try to get me that interview and ultimately give me an offer, like
Mhm.
would I have actually gone to work there? Would I have moved to Seattle? No, maybe not.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's always crazy to look back and look at those. At the time, they don't seem like very significant things that happen, but
yeah.
end up actually like sending our life on a whole different trajectory than
Oh
where it
yeah,
would have been otherwise.
little small butterfly effect type thing.
So when you were applying for these jobs, it sounds like it was through a college career fair, a college internship program. Like, how are you getting all of these
Yeah,
interviews? Because that could be important for somebody listening,
true.
trying to
Yeah,
get their
yeah.
career going. How did that? What did you use? Because it sounds like you had quite a few interviews lined up.
Yeah, I mean, I used primarily just like what our university had set up for it, and like their career fair thing, like brought in a bunch of like big name places, and like they're all there. Like there's like IBM, there was the NSA, and like there's just like so many places they're hiring, and all you did, like they even prepped you on this on how to approach folks at those booths, and you talk about them, you say why you're interested in them, you talk about some of your skills, you give them your resume, and then that's sort of how it went. And that's mostly how I did a lot of those. But like certainly, I didn't really have a traditional like internship experience, so to speak, which like is still sort of the recommended way to get that experience as an internship because it's paid and it's like a company that's like doing tech things.
Hmm.
And I instead had 1 year where I did Google Summer of Code, which is basically like an application based process where you say, I want to work on this project for this nonprofit. And that nonprofit like sponsors them as well. And so like they pay you some amount for the summer to do that. And you did that. So I did that 1 year, but it was still kind of like a solo thing. It wasn't really necessarily like a work type thing. My junior and senior year of college, I ended up working in the physics lab, which is
Oh,
sort of a
wow.
secondary interest of mine. This was actually with lasers, doing like a bunch of laser research. And
Huh.
I wasn't doing the laser research, but I was building software to basically run the control systems for things. So like when you hit this button or click this button or this door opens, like lock out these things, turn these lights on, shut off the lasers, move these motors, all that sorts of stuff.
Hmm.
So a lot of like if this then that type things that we would build. And me and a couple coworkers there end up becoming good friends and doing a lot of code type stuff for that. And so
Oh,
that
that's
absolutely
cool.
was a good part of the experience there. Did not pay very much, but it worked for the time.
Hmm. That's really cool. Because, yeah, you don't think about like the physics department needing a programmer, but it's very much needed because they have all of these specialized equipment that need to be programmed. And they're physicists. They don't know how to, how to work
Yeah,
a lot of that sometimes. I mean, some of them do, but that's really cool.
it was definitely good to have good relationships with people there because they gave me some really good recommendations, like when I was interviewing and all that. So it
Hmm.
was useful.
So you end up interviewing at Seattle, a company there, and it sounds like you accepted that position. You moved to Seattle. So straight from Ohio into Seattle. Was that jarring, that transition? Were you ready for the move away from home? Talk about that. Were you so excited to have that change? What was it like for Canyon to move
I
from
was
Ohio to Seattle?
Yeah, I was definitely excited to move. Like, I was like, I had always wanted to, like move somewhere and do something. And it wasn't like going to be a deal breaker if I got a job that was in Ohio, but I was like, well, here's an opportunity. I'm going to do it. And in like also in my head, I was like, oh, there's things like Valve over there. I can go work for Valve at some point. Never ended up doing that, but like in hindsight, I don't think I would have liked that culture either. But
Hmm.
I ended up working well at that place in Seattle for like 7 years, and then started doing like work from home stuff. But that's later on. Um, and as it would turn out, a very good friend of mine, who was my roommate in college, uh, also went to go work for them. And being a giant company, I can just say it was Amazon. Like there's no surprise at this point. It's Seattle. It's a big tech company. It was Amazon. They have like 100 something thousand engineers. It's ridiculous. But friend there also went to work there and ends up working like just on a different floor of me in the same building. Um, and like they had just tons of buildings, even more now, where it's just like what's the chances of that? So um, we remained good friends, still are, and started to meet just a whole bunch of other people there, like a bunch of coworkers that I had and a bunch of coworkers that my friend had, are actually good friends today. Like I live near a bunch of them and we hang out. Um, and a lot of that was just because we worked there. And it was a useful place to kind of learn and build things and all that stuff. Over time, it didn't necessarily fit me, kind of because my interest changed and my perspective on the company changed, and also the company changed. Like, yeah, everyone shits on Amazon, and you're kind of right to do it. So at a certain point, it kind of wears on you, and it's like I can't keep defending working
Yeah.
here. So
But
nah.
you were there for 7 years then? Like
Yeah, it's a
that?
lot longer than the tech industry average of a year and a half.
Yeah. Um, you started out probably as just a junior engineer. You're straight out of college. Did you kind of stay that way? Explain, like, what was your career like at Amazon for those 7 years? Because 7 years is,
Yeah.
again, a decent amount of time for
Yeah,
a
I had
tech
a couple
job.
of promotions and like they definitely wanted me to stick around and like keep going, but like I was like, no, I can't do that. But yeah, I worked on like sort of the retail side of things. I ended up working on sort of their corporate logistics, internal affairs type stuff for a while. I ended up knowing a bunch of lawyers at the company in a weird way because I helped out with like software licensing, um, which was also kind of an interesting perspective. Is like everyone's always scared of lawyers, like even the ones that are like on your side, like the corporate lawyers that are helping you put together your case for, doing something legally. But like you get to meet them and it's like you can figure out how they're thinking and why they're afraid of certain kinds of risks. And if you can figure out how to mitigate that, they'll be happy. Sometimes even that conversation is going to a happy hour with them and getting some beer, and then they go, oh, all right, that's probably fine. Well, we can figure something out with that. I'm like, there we go. So I ended up doing like a lot of almost negotiation on behalf of like other engineers at the company, which was I don't know, just a thing I never really thought about that I'd be doing, but it was also quite fun.
Yeah,
But it also meant that sometimes I sort of had to be bad cop and tell people like, you guys fucked up and you're gonna need to fix it. Like certainly I wasn't a person that would ever try to get anyone fired or anything. I would help them fix the thing, but it always would end with like folks that are like very stressed out because they just worked on this big project and like spent a bunch of time on it, and it's like, oh, you can't have done that way, like that's not going to work. Which would also get you the type of person that would like be like, oh, of course it works, I work at Amazon, therefore I'm always right. I'm like, well, no, that's not really how it is. There's a culture there of that.
Was the culture conducive to you coming out and saying those kinds of things, like when there were problems, being able to point those out? Because that does in certain work environments, that can be very challenging and very intimidating to be the one to be like, no, this isn't really going to work, and then also to actually be listened to when you bring up those types of issues.
I definitely learned an approach to having those conversations where I would lead with like, I want to help you launch this. Like start by offering to help. Tell them the things that might be wrong or that need to be changed before they launch, and then tell them how you're going to help with it. Maybe that meant I actually helped them write code or something and fix it. And sometimes I did. But that like almost like 99% of the time, like that was a useful way to do that, because like you make yourself an ally to someone and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna help you against the big bad lawyer and all that, to do something legally, ethically, all that, because like it wasn't that people were trying to be illegal about things or trying to even be unethical. It's just that like there's a sort of this momentum in a very large company where you're playing a game of telephone of requirements and like almost like rules and everything, where people have different versions in their head of why that rule is a rule. And at the end of the line, it just gets to someone that has the completely wrong idea about it. Or they've built something like within this narrow box of how they think something should work without thinking about a bigger picture. And if you don't think about those things, it seems like the thing that you built is perfectly fine. But it's like, oh no, the thing that you're doing has a lot of side effects for like ethical reasons or legal reasons or anything. And if you sort of help people like get out of that box a little bit, by helping them and also by just kind of explaining things, people were a lot more, I don't know, nice and cooperative. And again, a lot of those folks that like I would talk with about that would end up being like pretty much like good allies there, and a lot of other things, like whether it was like social things or getting things unstuck. Like in a big company, like there's a lot of things where you get stuck in a process and it's like, all right, who can help with this thing? It's like, oh wait, I know this person, and then they look at it and go, oh yeah, we just fix that up. So it definitely made a lot of connections doing that sort of thing. I mean, honestly, met a bunch of furries then, and I like knew they were furries. I'm like, oh, that's that fun weird thing. Neat.
So you start working at Amazon, you're right out of college, and it sounds like you made a lot of friends there at Amazon, but also sounds a lot of times when people are first out of college, they get their first job, they want to do a really good job, they want to be impressive, and sometimes we call this thing this work-life balance. Sometimes the balance skews more towards work rather than life. Did you find that was happening at all at Amazon? Were you kind of pushed into where work was the main priority for everything, or were you still able to keep a little bit of like a social life going on outside of work and other kind of hobbies and pursuits, or did you really just focus in on your career at that time?
Yeah, I was definitely lucky in that my coworkers on the very first team that I was on there were very like strict about like self-regulating your work time, and like they would like make sure that the new guy and everyone else knew there was like not overworking. And I kind of knew in my head, like I'd always sort of been told that sort of thing, like don't throw yourself away for your job and all that. But at the same time, it was good to hear that and see that they're like, no, it's the end of the day. It is 5 o'clock Friday. We're done. We're maybe we're going to happy hour, or maybe we're just going home, whatever. But that's it. We'll get to it next week. That's fine. And I've certainly like carried that sort of thinking over to people that I meet now that are new to the industry. My new coworkers, I'm like, nope, we're done here. You don't have to worry about this weekend. We will worry about it on Monday, and then go from there. And that was a very lucky like place to be in there as well, because Amazon is sort of like run like a collection of lots of tiny little startups, but they all sort of have like similar rules. It kind of meant that different teams built things different ways. And it kind of meant that there were different cultures in some. And like when I say different cultures, it also means like, yeah, there are shitty managers there. There are good managers. I was lucky to have good managers most of my time there, but like some of the bad managers there, like there's a reason that Amazon ended up in a New York Times article some amount of time ago about like people crying at their desk. And it's like, it sounds absurd as an article, but it actually lit a fire under their butts to fix a lot of things across the company and try to rein in terrible management and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But I at least was lucky to be on a team that had a good manager that kind of just trusted us to do the right things, because we had enough people that like they knew how to do things, and they showed me how to do things. And so they also showed me how to handle my job and how to not overwork and how to just sort of have fun with things and try to not stress about stuff. I certainly had stressful moments there, but like it's similar to like school. I just sort of ended up in a luckier situation, above average, I feel like, that ended up helping to influence my mindset for good mental health and balance.
So up until this point, and we're kind of getting to where we can probably pause this and go to another episode, but just to kind of finish on this, it sounds to me like your upbringing, the first few years of your life after college, were very normie. And we defined that a little earlier with chaotic, where it's just that's a term for a person that lives a normal life. They don't have a lot of like these weird hobbies like furry or other such things. So do you feel like that is a just assumption about your life up to that point, where you did leave just a very normal?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like we all had our quirks, but we all sort of were normie, we being like my general like friend group that I still have today. And yeah, later on we would all find interesting things about ourselves and about our interests and about our sexualities and all that. Well, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, it's definitely quite normie.
Yeah.
for that sort of experience.
So we'll go ahead and stop there, because I think that's a really good place to transition to, going from, a very normal upbringing to some of the things that we'll talk about in the next episode, discovering furry, discovering your sexuality, how it differed from, what you had thought growing up, or just, the assumptions you had. We'll go into just how you discovered furry, what furry has kind of meant for you, and the things that you've done within the fandom. And then we can also talk about you discovering ADHD through friends in the fandom and kind of getting a diagnosis of that, if that sounds like a good idea to go from here.
Totally. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right. So with that, thank you everybody for watching this podcast. If you liked what you watched, again, subscribe. It helps us a ton. We're just getting started. We've been so grateful for the amazing support we've had so far. Just fantastic. More than we could hope for. It's a lot of work to put this on for me and the guests that get on, and we're just so happy with everybody that's been supporting. So thanks again for watching. We'll have another episode for you shortly with the fantastic Kanjon. With that, thanks everyone. Oh, as I hit my mic, we'll edit that out. With that, thanks. We won't. See ya. Bye-bye.